Thank you, Greg. Thank you to our three speakers. Now, they've all asked if you had any questions. They mentioned the opportunity of establishing this dialogue. So if I may invite our panelists back up on stage, if we can just have a few moments for questions. And I will ask, who's the first person to ask a question? I can't see very
well. How about if I ask a question? The companies that are here presently, possibly looking at Canada as a market to expand in, how much understanding do you have in the marketplace? Or more importantly, if you've already done some investigation, what issues do you feel that you need more information on? Sure.
The biggest issue that we've come across is interpreting taxation. We're not looking to expand physically into Canada for a year or two, but we're trying to get some sort of presence, and we need a better interpretation of that, of what an actual business presence means to you guys.
Yeah. And I know we chatted about that briefly when you came in, and certainly I know we have experts here that are going to be able to talk about the taxation, but it was interesting because you were talking about e-fulfillment, I believe it was, and it's interesting because I think probably all our jurisdictions are looking at opportunities with respects to e-fulfillment. I know that what we have tried to do as a market is to be able to get all that information in advance and put it on our website. And so what we have done is we've identified a series of critical decision-making pieces for companies. And I would encourage yourself and anybody else that is interested in kind of getting a better understanding. And it's not just about looking at Winnipeg. It's more about, you know, what is the federal government's position and how you need to understand what's taking place in the market. One of the things that is quite interesting in Canada, which the largest metropolitan areas have been doing over the last number of years, and I know that we've chatted about this with S.A.G.E, is that we've created something called the Consider Canada City Alliance. And what this is a not-for-profit organization that's been set up with the 12 largest metropolitan areas in Canada that is working directly with the federal government of Canada, particularly the Department of Global Affairs Canada. And the whole idea is to collaborate with, you know, our internal competitors. But when we step away from Manitoba, we step away from Canada, we talk about Canada first. Because Canada has the brand, and it's important to be able to articulate what Canada has done in terms of creating a soft landing. And then it's up to each of the jurisdictions to effectively position where they have a value proposition to present to the company. So you know, we're partners, we're collaborators, and I know that when there's ever an opportunity to kind of you know, perhaps meet with yourself, if it doesn't fit within our marketplace, what we do is we will talk to our partners and say, look, there's another opportunity, because if it doesn't fit in Manitoba, it might fit better in Surrey or might fit better in Montreal. And that's the type of partnership we've developed over the last 5 years or so.
Thank you very much. We have another question.
Yes, during the conference that we just held the last 2 days, there was a lot of talk about innovation, startups, small companies. Is there anything that your three cities are doing that would encourage innovative entrepreneurs to move there, startups to start up? This is, of course, beyond hockey.
Well, certainly we encourage startups as much as we can, and we often get asked, and I think one of the incentives that is often used in the U.S. a lot are tax incentives and land and so on, because oftentimes we get asked by various manufacturing companies that think of moving to the West Coast, what are you going to do for us in terms of waiving taxes or giving us land or things like that? And that's not something that we typically do at all. But what we do offer is that collaboration, is creating those partnerships. So when I talked earlier about, for instance, in the clean tech sector, having Foresight, the clean tech accelerator, it's those kind of operations, those kind of organizations that will put young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs in touch with angel investors and so on. We'll get them into a collaborative lab space and so on, and with research from the universities and so on, which will offer them the kind of incentives, the kind of helping hand that will get them started and open doors for them for the future. So those are the kinds of partnerships and the type of help that we as a municipality can provide.
Yeah, we're exploring a bit of an approach where we're going to connect a number of our accelerators with other accelerators internationally. Just an example, we've been working with Queensland in Australia, specifically with Brisbane, and working specifically in the area of digital health. And what the approach is to work with those accelerators in Brisbane around digital health technologies, and give them the opportunity to come into Winnipeg and work with the accelerator, not to move the company, but to expose this company to the Canadian marketplace. Because if there's an opportunity for them to be successful in Australia, we want to provide a soft landing for them to have a larger global reach. So the idea is to be able to take our accelerators and partner them together, and then have a reciprocal arrangement for startups out of Winnipeg to expose themselves to the Australian market to see if there's an opportunity to also expand this new technology into their space. And so we have a memorandum of understanding with them. During our ICF meetings, we also spoke with Germany, and there's some interest with respects to that, and we'd like to take that out into the United States in particular. You know, as it's been stated so many times, we're the world's largest trading partner. I think in a lot of ways, we see ourselves as being domestic, even though we're absolutely two separate jurisdictions in terms of how we conduct business and some of the rules of business. But having said that, you know, if we're able to find soft landings, and once again, I keep saying soft landings because that's really what it's about. And so if we can connect, in this instance, institutions, but more importantly, accelerators or incubators to have startups cross the border to see if they can actually access the Canadian market and vice versa. So we're exploring that internationally. We'd like to be able to do that specifically in the United States.
Yep. And in Montreal, the ecosystem is definitely dynamic, and they work together. For instance, on the financing side, there's various like Real Ventures who will take the company that needs that $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, and there's other VCs that will take the next step. An example of that, the city of Montreal even put together Innocité, which is an accelerator specifically for solution targeting smart city. Actually, Beatrice was with us this week. Friday, not last Friday, but this past Friday, it was announced $100 million by the city for solutions targeting, again, the smart city. So 23 VCs got themselves together to put the money to find solutions for that. We also had a few successes. Password Box was acquired by Intel. The Notman House, which is the house of startup that was built 1 year ago. The private sector is also involved. Videotron, which is one of the largest telecom company in Montreal. There's the Startup Fest coming up in July. There's even buses leaving from New York. So yeah, the ecosystem definitely works together, and with the few successes that we had in the past few years, it's definitely coming up nicely.
It was made quite obvious during the ICF summit that your three cities are very innovative, and you've just provided examples in which you support startups and innovative companies. So thank you very much. We have another question.
Thanks for those presentations. They were really good. In a Canada-US context, for all of the complexities, things can be reduced to some very simple principles. It's really movement in this North American context, movement of people, movement of goods, and really movement of money, right, investment. Given that everyone is having to work in the innovation economy, talent is really the juice, right? What are you hearing from your clients, from your customers, and from your prospects about the movement of talent, whether it's labor, whether it's technical folks, engineers, or whether it's just business people? What are you hearing from them in terms of, particularly in the Canada-US context, in terms of the fluidity of that movement?
That's a great question, because I think we'd all agree everything is about labor and skilled labor, and is it reflective in terms of what drives your economy? You know, certainly we're constantly keeping our eye on and working with industry to try and find out, you know, where the gaps exist, and that issue of fluidity, movement of commerce, people, is still a challenge. Canada has a very aggressive immigration program. Each individual province has aggressive immigration programs. You know, we need immigration, and we need skilled labor coming from a variety of different locations internationally in order to ensure that we have that pipeline of skilled labor to kind of meet the needs of industry. And so I would say that it's an ongoing challenge. And we hear this from business all the time, particularly in the area of engineering, as an example. So what we've been trying to do is to try to figure out how do we best utilize the existing tools that we have, specifically with programs like the Provincial Nominee Program that helps expedite new immigrants coming in with the right types of skill sets. And we need to continue to do that. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see some reciprocity in terms of between Canada and the U.S. in terms of labor, and have easier flow of labor back and forth. There are certain areas, so the province of Manitoba is bordered in the south between Minnesota and North Dakota. And if you're on the, the east side of North Dakota, there are, people that are looking for employment, right? In the west side, they're not. So why wouldn't you be able to have some of these skills be able to transferably just come over and work in the various industries in Winnipeg? I mean, from, the nearest community in North Dakota is Grand Forks. Winnipeg is 2 hours away. They have a big university. We got a big university. Theirs is in aerospace and aeronautical. We have an aerospace sector. How can we actually come up with some sort of arrangement so you can have an easier flow and access of labor moving back and forth? So basically what you're doing is you're taking binational, regional approaches in terms of the movement of labor. And I think that would be great. I think that might be wishful thinking, but it is all about labor, and it is an ongoing challenge, I think, that we're all experiencing in North America. And we need to continually come up with different types of programs to be able to identify where can we attract the skilled labor into the market. So it's a long-winded response, but labor is critical. If you can't show a pipeline, it's very, very difficult to, number one, see existing companies expand, because that's where the majority of your growth comes from anyway. And it's even more difficult to convince a company to actually set up an operation until you can show that pipeline exists.
Certainly for more northern communities as well, it's very, very difficult to maintain or to retain the talent and the labor force because, of course, the trend is that everybody's migrating to cities. 80% of the world's population is now living in cities, and in Canada, 80% of our population lives within, I think 100 kilometers of our southern border, pretty much. So it's much more of an issue in northern communities. But really, a lot of it comes down to a quality of life issue. There used to be, in the past couple of decades, there was a real brain drain, and Canada really felt that brain drain, particularly to the U.S. I think that trend is reversing now in many respects and in a lot of different industries. Certainly, we've noticed that where we seem to be attracting American talent to come north of the border, and again, part of that is quality of life and other incentives and issues. But I agree that there needs to be a much more free flowing of talent as there is with the free trade agreement. There needs to be a much a freer movement of talent between the two countries as well.
One final question, I think. I realize this is the U.S.-Canada conference here, but in regard to Mexico, I've been, hearing and reading a lot about the Canada-Mexico relationship, and that hopefully, I know it's been strained because of visa issues and things like that over the last few years. Hopefully that's subsiding in the near future. But what are your communities' interaction with Mexico companies and businesses and people coming to your communities? What does that look like kind of in the bigger North American picture? Hi, Greg.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Great.
Well, since you asked, Rachel happens to work for an organization called NASCO, and we've been a long standing affiliate, board member, supporter of that organization, and really it started out as looking at how do you best leverage the opportunities between Canada, U.S., and Mexico with when NAFTA was first started. And so basically what we've done is we've focused our attention along something called the Mid-Continent Trade Corridor, and the idea is to figure out how do you develop stronger relationships between Canada, the center of the United States, and into Mexico. And so what we've really tried to do is to leverage those long-term relationships that we started 20 years ago plus. And so the idea for us in terms of looking at opportunities for Mexico is to figure out, once again, where are there opportunities that relate to the movement of goods first, the transportation in terms of making sure that you can move the product seamlessly between Canada-U.S. border and U.S.-Mexican border, and those have not been easy. Those are continue to be challenges. The concept of thickening the border is constantly front and center, and it creates some challenges. But what we've tried to do is to work with strategic partners, particularly in Mexico, particularly in Monterrey, Mexico, and certain communities around Mexico City. And I think that's it's an interesting, opportunity that I think exists to have greater integration in terms of, once again, our labor. And so what we see is we see that you have a free trade agreement as indicated, but you don't be able to have it really focused on the labor movement piece. So really the idea is to identify strategic partners within Mexico, make sure that they're relevant in terms of the opportunities that can be reciprocal in nature because they're consistent with the industry sectors that perhaps you have in your own jurisdiction, and figure out how do you now create opportunities for those companies to expand into Canada, or vice versa, Canadian companies expanding into Mexico. But it's the issue of labor again, and I don't know what the solution is to it, but I think that if everybody recognizes that it's all about talent, and we can't facilitate that need, that becomes a challenge for North America as a whole, because we're competing with other global regional locations, correct?
Thank you, and we do indeed have one last question.
You may have just given me the answer. This relates to the talent question. I was wondering who you see as your competitor for the talent, or is it location, is it industry? And what kinds of things or what kinds of activities do you do to create opportunities to tell your story and to really recruit talent?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting. When you have a fairly small market such as Winnipeg, I'll give you an example with the aerospace sector. We have 4 major companies. And what you end up happening is that if any one of those 4 are expanding, typically what ends up doing is they end up drawing their talent from one of their competitors in the market. Now that's free market and that's fair game. So what we've tried to do is to work with industry and work directly with our post-secondaries to ensure that, once again, I talk about this pipeline, that this pipeline starts to take hold, because we're hearing from industry saying we need 150 new engineers a year for the next 10 years. And the only way post-secondaries will respond to that really is if, in fact, the industry is basically validating the fact that this is taking place. So what we try and do as an organization is to make sure that there's this collaboration between post-secondaries and the private sector, because obviously you have students coming out, but if they're not going to fit into your marketplace, then really you're missing the opportunity of creating meaningful employment for the student coming out, but also to ensure that the company has, once again, that pipeline going forward. I mean, what we try and do is, it's like all my partners up here, is we go out and we tell our story. And what we try and do is identify, where are the best locations internationally to tell that story. I think I mentioned earlier on is that you can't be everything to everybody, so we're not looking at the entire planet to say, we have to go there. We need to strategically focus, where do we have some interest? U.S. Midwest, very interested. There's a lot of commonality in terms of our industry sectors, so we try and have those conversations that we're doing here today. We're looking at certain locations in Europe, as an example. So it really is heavy lifting. It's about getting the right value proposition and articulating it to the right jurisdiction so that you can show that there's an opportunity. And this is not about, you know, moving headquarters, really, from our perspective. It's about looking at companies that are trying to understand where they can expand their operations. And we want to provide them the best information possible so that they can have an informed decision if they're looking at coming into Canada. And in this instance, we'd want to put that value proposition in terms of Winnipeg and Manitoba as a good location for them to expand.
And I'll just add very quickly to that, and really it is, it's sectorally based when you ask about talent, and certainly in medical technology, for instance, having clusters, having research dollars available and so on is what attracts the best and brightest to come and be part of something exciting. British Columbia has historically been a resource extraction province. We have very much been lumber and everything else, and lumber and natural gas and mining and so on, and that is moving to the knowledge-based economy, and so trying to attract talent globally into those new and emerging sectors is one of our greatest challenges. So first of all, trying to grow that talent at home with putting money into the universities and so on, but then as well going out on trade missions and specifically targeting certain business sectors to attract that talent to come to our region is critically important.
Thank you all. Thank you again for the presentations on Surrey, Montreal, and Winnipeg.
Why I came up here. All we're going to do now, I'm getting soft on Friday. There's actually a break right now, a networking break for about till 10:30, and then we'll convene for the government incentives in session, and then the legal attacks, and then we'll convene for our roundtable. So please enjoy some coffee and breakfast. We'll be back in about 15 minutes.